Chapter 12, The Miserable Life of Bernie LeBaron, A Flower in the Water. I know where I live, Tatiana said. I just asked her if I could walk her home after visiting Zinnia again that Saturday. Tatiana had taken several dozen photos of flowers and bees and hummingbirds. I thought she sounded unfairly hostile toward the guy who had just helped her get the pictures she needed to achieve science fair fame. Maybe my essay and the pictures weren't enough to overcome the memory of me tangling with a spider's web and kissing a car door. Or maybe she just didn't want to be seen too much with me. Word got around about things like that. I went to the library to meet Aunt Elsie. She volunteered to help them organize the community activities. While I waited, I sat at one of the tables and tried to read the Grimm's fairy tales. No, Mrs. Grimm didn't write them, but she probably could have. Those brothers Grimm were just as weird as Poe. I mean, if they really told those stories to kids, they must have given them permanent psychological scars. After all, the stepsisters in Cinderella cut off part of their feet to try to fool the prince. That's how the prince knew who the real Cinderella was. Then some birds pecked out their eyes. The real Red Riding Hood got eaten by the wolf, and I'm too embarrassed to say what happened to Sleeping Beauty. This stuff was sick. While I was freaking out about the fairy tales, one of the librarians came up to me. "You're Bernie LeBaron, aren't you?" I looked up. "Yeah." "Would you autograph your article for me?" I looked around to see if she was talking to somebody else. "Me?" She smiled. "My brother has dementia. Your article inspired me." Okay. Now that was seriously weird. People like me didn't give autographs. We couldn't even get autographs when we wanted them. I tried to sign really carefully. I even stuck my tongue out the side of my mouth in concentration. It didn't help. My signature still looked like some lazy worm covered in ink had wiggled across the page. The woman didn't seem to mind, though. On the way home, Aunt Elsie kept going on about how they needed some new ideas for the community activities, but I wasn't listening. My thoughts were on Tatiana and Zinnia. I was remembering the excitement in Tatiana's face, the way her eyes sparkled as Zinnia showed her around the garden, and how she pushed the hair behind her ear. "Flowers," I said and shook my head. "What?" Aunt Elsie said. "What?" I said. "Why did you say flowers?" I was just thinking about Marigold's flower garden." No way was I going to tell her what I was really thinking, that I was really thinking about Tatiana's beautiful hair. Aunt Elsie glanced over at me with an expression of astonishment. "You're right," she said. "I am?" She lost me. "That's a great idea." It is? Let's stop by on our way home." I didn't understand what she was talking about until she explained the whole thing to Zinnia, and Zinnia thought the idea was marvelous too. I guess it is possible to have great ideas even when they're not your own. In science class, we discovered that Mr. Woolley loved pyrotechnics. Every chance he got, he blew something up. Then he would laugh his slow, dry laugh while we all applauded at the flash of light and billowing smoke. For a turtle, he sure knew how to have fun with chemicals. One time, he lost control. A big jet of hot, yellow flame leapt up to the ceiling right underneath one of those heat detectors. Of course, a fire alarm went off. The sprinklers came on, and the entire lab got flooded. "Out," Mr. Woolley said. Even when the fire alarm was ringing and his lab and his students were getting drenched, his voice never changed pitch. We all ran for it. I grabbed up my backpack and hurried for the door when I felt something tug on my back. I looked back to find Tatiana scowling at me as the sprinklers soaked us. She was bent over with one hand on a bunch of her hair that had somehow become attached to my bag. "Do you mind?" she said. "Oh, sorry," I said. I dropped my bag and she peeled her hair from it. "Thanks," she said as she rolled her eyes and flipped the hair behind her back. I'm such a chump. I followed her out. Man, her hair was thick. Even when it was wet, it covered her entire back like a blanket of seaweed. When we got outside, she wrung it out and braided it, and the braid was roughly the size of a python. We spent the rest of the period singing songs with Miss Riley, who had rescued her guitar. The principal wasn't around to tell us to be quiet like we were supposed to, so we sang loud and long. Halfway through Kumbaya, Mr. Woolley started wandering around counting students. "Where's Brock?" he asked. I admit that I started having evil thoughts about what might have happened to him, until one of his friends ruined it. He's stuck in the bathroom, he said. The kid had his cell phone in his hand. Mr. Woolley stopped, looked up at the sky, mumbled something, and then shuffled back into the building. He came out 10 minutes later with Brock trailing behind him. Brock was trying to act cool, but when you've got a toilet paper tail hanging out of your pants, no amount of swagger is going to make any difference. Emily found out later that somehow he had been locked in the bathroom and had texted his friend to get him out. Rumor was Mr. Woolley found him banging on the door, begging for help. I guess he didn't know that it was only Mr. Woolley's pyrotechnics that had set off the alarm. Maybe that's why the toilet paper never made it into the toilet. Just a guess. Despite the hair snafu, I started working with Tatiana in science. She didn't have much of a choice since Mr. Woolley had paired us together, but she didn't complain either. I can't begin to explain how it makes a boy feel to be partnered with a pretty girl who doesn't visibly turn up her nose at the prospect, especially after all the stupid things I had done in her presence. Man, I was sailing high. When we had to dissect the frog, she recoiled and turned her lip up in a sneer. "It stinks, and I am not touching it," she said. "You're not afraid of spiders, but you can't touch a dead frog?" I asked. "I can see that it's dead," she sniffed. "You cut it up. I'll tell you what the parts are." She held a diagram with one hand and pinched her nose with the other. We worked pretty well together. I did the dirty work, and she made me look good. Her hair scared me, though. I mean, it was everywhere. I guess that explains how it magically appeared on my backpack. She pulled it back in a long ponytail for class, but it had a habit of finding its way to the front. I almost set her entire head on fire once when she bent over to pick up something, and her hair jumped onto the table right by the burner I was trying to light. "Watch out!" I yelled. I grabbed her hair to pull it away from the flames. I got it away from the flames all right, but I also yanked her off her feet. She came up with murder in her eyes, and I had to explain super fast what had happened. "You touch my hair again," she said, "and I'll strangle you with it." I believed her. Her brow stayed pinched and frowned for the rest of the period. After the second hair snafu, it took a while for me to get up the courage to tell her about Marigold's flower presentation at the library. I procrastinated until I knew she was going over to Zinnia's again to take more pictures. I had to tell her then because I didn't want Zinnia to do it. If she did, I couldn't ask Tatiana to go with me, so I cornered her after lunch. "I was wondering," I began, "if you are busy on Saturday." Her eyes narrowed, and I almost gave up and sprinted for safety. I steeled my nerves. "Flower is going to Marigold at the library," I stuttered. Marigold is going to give a presentation at the library." "I know," she said, giving me a bored little frown. I deflated like an old balloon. "Oh," I said. "I'll come with you," she said, "if you promise not to touch my hair." I never could figure out how girls did that. I haven't even asked her yet. Anyway, that's how I ended up sitting next to Tatiana while Marigold gave a presentation on flower gardening to a packed room at the library. Marigold wore a yellow flower which Tatiana told me was a marigold, pinned to her blouse, and Zinnia had piled Marigold's hair up into a bun and poked little purple flowers in it. Marigold's eyes still drooled, but I had never seen her look so young. Zinnia ran through a PowerPoint with amazing pictures while Marigold talked. You wouldn't know Marigold had Alzheimer's by the way she explained everything there was to know about each flower in the slides. She really knew her stuff. I thought Tatiana might fall off her chair, she was so excited. If it had been about animals, I might have paid more attention. I guess flowers are just a girl thing. I don't know. Any excuse to sit next to Tatiana was a good one, though. I felt a little bit taller and a little bit more important sitting next to her. After the presentation, people started gathering around Marigold to congratulate her. I could see she wasn't enjoying it. Her eyes were moving back and forth, and she was starting to breathe faster and fidget from side to side. I went up to her, took her hand, and led her away to the punch bowl at the back of the room. I gave her a glass of red punch, and then went to the bathroom because, well, I was starting to see yellow. I had to go so bad. When I came back, I found Zinnia and Tatiana deep in conversation with some old lady, and a bunch of people gathered around the flower arrangements that Marigold had made for her display. I couldn't see Marigold anywhere. "Excuse me," I said to Zinnia. She glanced at me and was about to introduce me to the old woman when she stopped. She must have read my mind again. "What?" she said. "Where's Marigold?" I asked. Zinnia scanned the room. "Oh no, please no." Zinnia ran out into the hallway calling for her mother. Aunt Elsie and Tatiana and I followed her. We stopped at the checkout counter to explain that Marigold was missing and asked them to help search the library. Soon, a crowd of people were peering under tables and checking the book stacks. Zinnia didn't wait for this. She ran out of the library, jumped into her car, and gunned the engine. I knew she was heading for home to see if Marigold had tried to find her way back. Seeing Zinnia's terror made my guts get all squishy. I mean, Marigold could be scary, but lately, I'd come to see her kind of like a little frightened child. I didn't know what I would do if anything happened to her. We split up and went around the building, checking all the alleys. Zinnia came back in a few minutes, frantic with terror. I had never seen someone so distraught. My chest burned with that horrible feeling that something bad was going to happen. No one had seen Marigold. Aunt Elsie called the police, and soon police cars were driving up and down the streets with other volunteers from the library. Marigold had disappeared. I never should have left her alone. Tatiana paced around, wringing her hands, and Zinnia was beside herself. Aunt Elsie stayed with Zinnia, doing what she could to comfort her. It seemed to me that all of this noise and commotion would only upset Marigold more, and I remembered what Poe had tried to show about rationality. Maybe we couldn't find her because we were being too rational. Maybe you had to be irrational to find someone suffering from Alzheimer's. The rational thing for her to do would be to go home, so that was the wrong place to look for her. The irrational thing to do would be to find someplace dark and quiet to hide. But where would she hide? Even as I thought it, I knew where she would be. I broke into a run. It was by the river, and I knew she wasn't strong enough to swim. A few blocks from the library, a low bridge crossed the river. A big patch of purple flowers blossomed there, just the kind of thing that would attract Marigold. If she had had a good 10-minute start on everyone, she could have made it there easily. And it was dark under the bridge. She would probably think it was the perfect hiding place. But the river was deep and muddy. "Marigold!" I yelled as I ran up to the bridge. "Marigold!" Silence greeted me. My blood ran cold. Maybe I had guessed wrong? I stepped up to the edge of the river and peered down at the dark, swirling water. A rock landed in my stomach when I saw the yellow flower Marigold had been wearing on her blouse, caught on a branch a few feet out in the water. The muddy water tugged at the dainty flower the way it might have plucked at Marigold's frail body as she stepped into it.